Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and we are 1 week away from the NFL draft, which means I have one more pre-draft IDP positional rankings episode to run through in order to get you guys ahead of the game for our all-important rookie drafts. I'm covering a position that I'm actually feeling optimistic about this year, the defensive backs, safety specifically, but also I'm going to be covering the very intriguing Travis Hunter in this episode, talking about kind of the many approaches for him in our fantasy leagues with IDP, which I'm looking forward to covering along with everyone else in this class. So let's get it. All right, the safeties or DBs, since Travis Hunter won't be a safety, we have a pretty solid crop of options this year. I think more so than other years as well, but we'll find out about that, if that holds true or not in due time. Now, usually I'd have my guy John Glosser on this episode, but unfortunately there were some scheduling conflicts this week that wouldn't let us get together. So I'm riding solo for this one. I apologize for that, but we will get Glosser back on post-draft to help me rank and sort these DBs. And, once the draft capital and landing spots come in, and get his thoughts on this class as well. So I'm looking forward to that. But for today, it's just me. And if you've listened to these previous episodes covering the rookies, you'll know that I leaned a lot on my prospect models to evaluate these players. And I'm going to do the same for the safeties as well, because I'm actually quite happy with how this model came out. The success rates that went along with it as well, which I didn't think I'd be able to do because it's such a volatile position in the NFL. But I'll throw the success rates up on the screen right now and talk about them and what we're looking at for those that finished 95th percentile or higher, of which there were about 20-ish prospects in that range dating back to 2018. And of those top 95th percentile finishers, 57% have gone on to finish as top 12 IDPs at least once. Which, I mean, anybody that, pays attention to fantasy, getting a more than 50-50 shot for a top fantasy finish in general is excellent. And for the DB position specifically, that's a massive win considering the sizable pool of players to choose from. And you look at top 24 and top 36 finishers, and obviously that number is going to be a little bit better. But we're actually looking at 81% for top 24 and 86% for top 36 success. So really high numbers there. And then obviously the lower the score from there, the lower the potential hit rate goes, but still a really strong correlation that I'm quite happy with. And hopefully you guys are as well, because I'm going to be leaning on that a lot for this episode as kind of my guide in evaluating these prospects, which leans on a combination of, draft capital, career grades, usage, specific production metrics to create our 1 to 10 scale. And I'll link the free PFF article covering my rookie safety model in the episode description so that you guys have access to that as well if you want to follow along, if you so please. So enough of that. Let's roll. I guess the best way to do this is just by how I'll have them ranked, and maybe go 10 to 1. So I'll start with my DB 10. Again, we're including Travis Hunter as part of this, and he's the only cornerback. There's really no point in ranking cornerbacks for IDP rookie drafts, especially pre-draft, because that position is almost exclusively about draft capital and opportunity. So not much evaluation needed there, but let's go to DB 10. And for me, that is Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma. So Bowman is currently projected to go outside of the top 100 picks right now, and a day 3 safety, which is definitely significant because when it comes to that draft range, post 100 picks, that is, there are a few safety prospects who go on to deliver top 12 fantasy performances. And not to say it's impossible, but it just becomes significantly less likely with that draft capital. And in fact, a few prospects that did do that since 2018 who entered the draft as safeties and finished top 12 for IDP were a few of them were actually guys that had to change their positions to do so once they got to the NFL. So I'm looking at Foye Oluokun is one. He was a safety out of Yale. Kaiser White was a safety out of West Virginia. Even Trey Flowers was switched to cornerback and became a top 12 finisher at that position. Jamian Sherwood, I believe, was another one, if I remember his draft capital specifically. Yeah. So yeah, all these guys who were, drafted outside the top 100 who remained DBs really had to get prime alignment to get to that top 12 finish. So I'm thinking about guys like Josh Metellus, basically working as LB2 for Minnesota, Quentin Lake working as like a slot and box heavy option for the Rams last year. And then even Cameron Curl, we've seen have to get elite box usage to kind of get there. So that's the draft capital aspect of it for Billy Bowman. But what about the tangibles that he can control? So what got him as a 72nd percentile score in the model, aside from draft capital, which isn't a bad score to get, but it's obviously not nearly as ideal as some of the other options in this class. But where he loses points first is kind of as a run defender. He ranked just 11th percentile in career run defense grade. And really just overall, he ranks no better than 67th percentile in the metrics that the model deemed to matter, which is his coverage grade, which was the highest one. Now, a big way that these safeties outside the top 100 in the draft can make a difference for IDP is with prime IDP alignments, like I mentioned, with guys like Metellus and Curl, and that usage closer to the line of scrimmage. But for Bowman, as a very small prospect for his position, that just doesn't feel likely that an NFL team would deploy him in that role. He's not that, sizable box banging safety where, and that shows up in a lot of his numbers as well, where, a big reason why his run defense grade is so poor, first of all, but he also misses a ton of tackles. He just has this inability to wrap up, but he's got really short arms, like bottom 5th percentile arm length. So he's going to miss a ton of tackles. He has a small frame. So I am concerned that won't translate to IDP the way that others who overcame their draft capital were able to do, guys like Talanoa Hufanga and Donovan Wilson, on top of the other names that I mentioned before, because they did get those prime alignments to kind of make a difference. So all that to say, Bowman comes in at 10 for me, as I'm not like overly optimistic about his IDP potential, but not impossible for him to get there with the right usage and opportunity. All right, coming in at number 9 for me is where I maybe start to get a little bit more optimistic about this class, which is much earlier than I've been optimistic about safety classes of years past. And that's number 9. So Sebastian Castro out of Iowa. Now, Castro is projected to go outside the top 100 as well, and later than anyone else in this year's crop of DBs, it seems, that I'll be covering today. So I'm definitely treating Castro as more of a sleeper for sure, but just based on his overall potential to become an NFL starter in what could be an IDP friendly deployment, I feel more optimistic about him than Bowman, although we'll have to see how that shakes out, obviously, come draft day. But right now, he is being classified as a safety coming out of college, even though he spent the large majority of his college career covering the slot. And he actually came up with high-end career grades across the board in that role. So he did suffer a little bit of a drop-off in play during the 2024 season, which isn't ideal, obviously, for his potential draft capital. But thanks to flashing the high-end play in his career as a whole, he comes out with an encouraging overall profile and the best prospect score of any day 3 safety in this class. He earned a 7.97 in the model, which ranks 88th percentile since 2018. Now, this ideally helps him get treated as a starter in the NFL at some point, but it's not a guarantee, right? As I mentioned with Bowman and guys going outside the top 100, it's not a great outlook for top 12 potential, but that doesn't mean he can't be a weekly starter in those deeper IDP leagues with multiple DB slots. So he played primarily in the slot, wasn't nearly as effective as a tackler with just an 8% career tackle rate. That ranks 21st percentile among past prospects since 2018. But luckily, the defensive back tackle rate from college to the NFL is wildly unstable and can easily end up being favorable at the next level with ideal deployment and usage as a starter. I've talked about college tackle rate being a poor way to evaluate prospects before. And for DB specifically, it's significantly worse because these guys often get much more varied usage at the next level year to year and even week to week. So please don't trust college tackle rate. It's essentially worthless in the grand scheme of things. So for Castro, I think he has the versatility to play either safety or in the slot, which should help him get on the field early in his career, even if not right away. Like just being able to fill multiple positions and do it well, as highlighted in the model score. And how I mentioned, when covering Bowman, that if you're going to go outside the top 100, you need to do more than your typical safety to translate to IDP, which is what Castro can do. And back to his prospect score as well, which generally puts him at about a 31% chance for top 12 potential, 49% for top 24, 58% for top 36. Being drafted outside the top 100, we could probably temper those expectations a little bit more, but I still like Castro enough to have him kind of just inside my top 10 here. Okay, another safety to cover here. One of the deeper names before we kind of get into like the day two guys. My number 8 here, the Ocho, is Lathan Ransom of Ohio State. Also wears number 8. So Ransom is also expected to kind of go outside the top 100 for this class, although not too far, like just like the previously mentioned Bowman. But for all those concerns that were there with Bowman's outlook for IDP, Ransom does have he does have the same kind of concerns when it comes to draft capital, but he also possesses more of the required tools to get that more premium usage in the NFL than Bowman, thanks to more ideal size and run defense chops as well. Like he ranks 91st percentile in run defense grade, obviously much better than Bowman, but also a better career overall grade and production numbers than Bowman, who only really beats out Ransom in coverage grade and not by much. So the other thing that I think really helps Ransom is that he spent about 30% of his career snaps in the box, which is the most for these potential third or fourth rounders that we'll cover today. So he checks the box for good size, checks the box for good run defense grade. He has a history of usage around the line of scrimmage and doing so at Ohio State in a Power 4 conference. So no concern about the level of competition there either. I think the biggest concern for Ransom is just going to be potential draft capital, which is going to, make him more landing spot dependent than all the names that I have ranked ahead of him that I'll talk about soon. And it makes sense since he isn't like this amazing scorer in the model, though ultimately not bad either. He has a 7.63 score. It's about 80th percentile. And he comps similarly to some other top 24 IDPs like Jonathan Abram and Jordan Whitehead. Whitehead actually probably is his most accurate and optimistic comp as another guy drafted round 4 who spent a good chunk of his snaps in the box in college. It's one comp and even it's only like a 43% likelihood to get to that top 24 range based on the model. But like Whitehead, I think, he could be worthy of being like a taxi stash in deeper leagues to start his career. So just a name to kind of keep an eye on where he goes come draft day. All right, next, number 7, I have got Jonas Sanker out of Virginia. So as far as day 3 players to bet on, Sanker is kind of my guy because I think he is one of the better options for IDP based on his score landing in that 85th percentile of prospects. But also, Sanker spent 41% of his defensive snaps in the box for his college career, which we're going to love if that is how an NFL team views his potential usage as well. Obviously, that usage in college allowed him to be a highly efficient tackler for the position as well. He was like 95th percentile tackle rate. Again, doesn't really matter, but it's just, pointing out his usage and how that can affect him. And he was first to the ball more often than not as well. He ranked 86th percentile among prospects in first contact rate. So for IDP managers, if we're venturing into day 3, we should kind of be honing in on guys that will likely play around the line of scrimmage. And Sanker, to me, is the name to monitor come draft day. Should he land on like a thin depth chart with a chance to start in the near future, even if not immediately in year one, right? Like the main thing is that Sanker's appeal for IDP comes from that ability to thrive around the line of scrimmage and rack up tackles. Interestingly, Sanker owns an identical prospect score as Talanoa Hufanga, who shares a number of similarities coming out of college as well. Both players averaged over 40% of their defensive snaps in the box. So that's one part of it. Hufanga's career grades are even similar to Sanker. 82.6 career grade for Hufanga, 82.2 for Sanker, 75.2 run defense grade for Hufanga, 76.5 for Sanker, 86.9 coverage grade for Hufanga. So that was a little bit better than Sanker's 80.8. But it's one ideal example, but for IDP, Sanker has kind of a path to success as an IDP prospect, similar to Talanoa Hufanga. Now, Sanker, he joins about 29 other prospects who have scored among the top kind of 80th percentile and were drafted outside the top 100 in the NFL draft. 5 of them have become top 12 IDPs, so only about 17%. 8 of them have been at least top 24, so 28%, and then 12 have finished at least top 36, so 33%, so a third of them. When you take into account his potential usage in the NFL, if we're talking day 3 paths to success, that's about the most ideal outlook for a pick outside the top 100 that I could get, and has me probably slightly more optimistic about him than the other day 3 guys. So I do like Sanker quite a bit, but again, understanding that the day 3 guys have a lower success rate, I just think he has probably the best opportunity just based on his potential around the line of scrimmage, and that's for IDP purposes. Okay, on to number 6 for me, which is Andrew Mukuba out of Texas. So he is our first expected day 2 safety prospect, and while like a third round pick's likelihood of hitting is better than obviously the day 3 guys, it's still important to recognize that Mukuba, his IDP impact might not be felt immediately in his career, right? There are several past prospects who went third round or later in the NFL draft that we're still kind of waiting to hit on waiting on to hit for IDP. We could hit on them too if we meet them in person, as long as they allow it. But even for a player with a strong prospect score like Mukuba, he finds himself among the top 90th percentile, so that's great. It's still not an easy path to success. So I was looking at other round 3 draft picks who score at least 90th percentile in this model, and includes names like Julian Blackmon, Tyke Smith, Jordan Battle, Cameron Kinchens, Kalen Bullock, Mike Edwards, Nick Cross, Tanner Muse, Tarvarius Moore, Antoine Brooks Jr., Kirby Joseph, Ashton Davis, Divine Diablo, and Armani Watts. Now, only Blackmon, Edwards, Cross, and Joseph have finished as at least top 36 IDP scorers. Only Nick Cross has finished top 12 of that group. But for those 4 players out of that group who have found at least top 36 success, they all took at least 3 seasons to get there. It was like 5 for Julian Blackmon. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see Mukuba kind of follow a similar long-term path here, but also actually at the same time, kind of to shift gears a little bit about some of these non-rookies, I think that maybe creates a little bit of optimism for the likes of guys like Tyke Smith, Jordan Battle, Cameron Kinchens, Kalen Bullocks, who have all played fewer than 3 NFL seasons under their belts right now. So they still have plenty of runway to kind of still become those fantasy starters for us at some point, which, for Jordan Battle specifically, hopefully it is this year. But I'm interested in Mukuba, but I imagine he'll be kind of a taxi stash at best for a little while. So not necessarily spending much to get him in rookie drafts, but like with anyone else on this list, landing spot is going to play a big part of it. All right, top 5 now. This is really where I think we get the most relevant names for fantasy IDP purposes as the most likely safeties to get drafted in our IDP rookie drafts. So starting with number 5 for me, it's Winston Jr. out of Penn State. So Winston is another potential third round pick. He scored an 8.17 in the prospect model. So just around that 89th or 90th percentile mark, like Mukuba and kind of the rest of the names on this list as well. They all scored higher. So now Winston, he did miss almost the entire 2024 season due to injury, but it seems like he'll be good to go this offseason with little kind of long-term concern there. I know Trevor Sikkema here loves Winston. I believe he has him as safety 2 for him. So I trust Trevor's evaluation of him as a worthy kind of top option in this class. So these next 4 safeties are all really super tight in the rankings for me. I think where Winston stands out is as a run defender. He owns the best career run defense grade, a 94.3 among 400 safety prospects since 2018, which is a very difficult number to achieve for a player who spent 59% of his career defensive snaps lined up deep. But it's also worth noting that, Winston, he only has 694 total defensive snaps for his career. So there's a very small sample size to kind of consider there. But coming back to the run defense grades, strong run defense grades alone aren't enough to kind of create excitement about a prospect, but there were some high-end scorers in the model who were drafted in the first 2 rounds, guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, Derwin James, Jalen Petrie, Brian Branch, Taylor Rapp, Jeremy Chin, Juan Thornhill. All those guys, except for Thornhill, have been top 12 IDPs. Now, unfortunately, looking at the 3rd round prospects, which is where Winston is expected to go, that also have elite run defense scores, it is a bit more hit and miss, which is also really just the nature of being a 3rd round pick or later as well. But compared to other safeties who were drafted into, in either round 1 or 2 of the NFL draft, there have been 8 total safeties. Let me see. 8 safeties with a 90 or higher run defense grade for their college career in rounds 1 or 2. And then there were 21 pass prospects from this model that were drafted 3rd round or later and had a run defense grade above 90 and led to only 1 top 12 IDP finish, which was Kaiser White, who did so as a linebacker. So there were only 2 other top 36 finishers from that cohort, Andrew Wingard and DeMar Hamlin. So it's a low success rate, 14.3% at best, and with an even more limited ceiling. So luckily, that's just looking at things from like a run defense perspective. As a whole, and with everything in the model combined, Winston is a solid prospect and in a good range to be IDP relevant. It just won't necessarily be because of, his 100th percentile run defense grade alone, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's Kevin Winston. On to my DB4 now. Technically, this is going to be my safety 3. I've got Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. So I mentioned kind of the tightness in ranks here for my 4 safeties, and that only gets tighter among the top 3, with Watts coming in right behind Starks and Emmanwori, who I'll talk about in a minute. Those guys are all really tight in the model and in my rankings. And as far as scores for top 3 players, like in previous draft classes, this is the tightest that the top 3 safeties in any single class has been in this model since 2018. So maybe one of the more top heavy classes in recent years for IDP as well. But all 3 of these guys, arguably 4 guys, have a strong shot to be weekly IDP starters. And for Watts specifically, while he isn't likely to go in the first round, he does own actually a better overall and coverage grade than the 2 who are expected to be first rounders. So even with draft capital removed, Watts does actually still come in a tiny bit behind Starks and Emmanwori in the model. So just to provide some context there. But one of the nice things about Watts, I think, is his kind of versatility, where he owns a more ideal split of deep and box snaps for his career, 43% deep, 30% in the box. So it gives him kind of a wider range of potential fits in different defensive schemes. He also separates himself from the first round safeties a bit because his play on pass rate is the best in this class for top 200 prospects, which is obviously how he came up with a class leading 13 career interceptions. So going on day 2 of the NFL draft versus the first round is likely going to keep Watts from being, as desirable for IDP as Starks and Emmanwori. But several other similar scorers also went in that range on draft day and found high-end IDP success. We're looking at guys like Xavier McKinney, Brian Branch, Jalen Petrie, Jaquan Brisker, Grant Delpit, Antoine Winfield Jr., Taylor Rapp, and Justin Reed. So That creates about a 57% success rate for round two safeties who scored at least an 8.35 in this model, while four more, Richie Grant, Trayvon Merrick, Javon Holland, and Tyler Nubin, have finished at least top 24. So it improves that hit rate to 86%. So, and then actually only two other ones, Lewis Seen and Juan Thornhill, failed to crack even the top 36 IDP safeties that also fall in that cohort. So I'm really encouraged about Watts's outlook, all things considered. He has one of the strongest potentials for this class, and I think he should be locked in as our safety three for this class heading into the NFL draft. We'll see if the draft changes that at all, but really like Xavier Watts as a potential top three safety for 2025, the 2025 class, I should say. Okay, safety two for me is Malaki Starks out of Georgia. So Starks is projected to be the first safety taken in this year's NFL draft, though that gap has closed significantly coming out of the combine. But Starks' score in this model still ranks in that top cohort where like top 12 IDP safety becomes the greatest possibility. As mentioned at the top of the show when we were covering the hit rates, right? So he's right there. And as a potential first round pick, he'll have a nice long runway to succeed at the next level for the most part, right? Assuming he's not the next Lewis Seen, also out of Georgia. But let's assume that he's not, since Seen has been more of an outlier anyways. But yeah, most high-end safeties, they have these high-end career coverage grades. Starks, where he kind of separates himself a bit, is his work as a run defender, where he's earned a 90.3 career run defense grade, which ranks 92nd percentile among safety prospects since 2018. So I kind of referenced this in covering Kevin Winston Jr., how having those high-end marks in run defense grade can help increase a first or second round prospect's chances to succeed a little more. And that's the case with Starks here. So compared to other safeties who were drafted in either round 1 or 2 of the NFL draft, there have been 7 safeties with a 90 or higher run defense grade for their college careers. Starks will be the 8th. And we're looking at Minkah Fitzpatrick, Derwin James, Jalen Petrie, Brian Branch, Taylor Rapp, Jeremy Chin, and Juan Thornhill. Again, all except for Thornhill have finished top 12 for their position at least once so far. So 85.7%. So he is in elite company for potential IDP success. Obviously, that's just one isolated way to look at it, which increases his hit rate for top 12. So like every other player in this class, we can't really rely solely on that and have to understand that there's more that goes into his IDP potential. And that's why this model even exists, is to have a greater collection of metrics to put together. And even with all things considered, Starks is in that top cohort of prospects with the best success rates in this model. So that's a player, who even as he profiles as more of a deep safety in the NFL, several of those guys that, are comparables that I mentioned with strong run defense grades also played from more of a deep alignment. So it's not a huge deal, and he'll still be a player that we want to target in IDP rookie drafts where appropriate. We're not taking him in the first 2 rounds of rookie drafts, and I think even round 3 is questionable for the position. But if you're going to spend up on a safety, then make sure it's one of these, high success rate guys like a Malaki Starks. All right. Or, other than Malaki Starks, you could look at my next safety on the list here. My safety 1 and technically DB2 is Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina. So Emmanwori has slowly crept up the consensus board after an impressive combine to the point where he could now push to be the first safety drafted, depending on what teams are looking for. He's now only a couple spots behind Starks in consensus mock boards, which wasn't the case even a few weeks ago. So he's definitely on the rise. And for me, he ties Malaki Starks in the prospect model score, all things considered here. But the tiebreaker for me and why I want Starks over, or why I want Emmanwori over Starks right now, is because of his size and his ability to potentially rotate down closer to the line of scrimmage, which, as we know, for IDP is a significant advantage, and one that I think Emmanwori holds over Starks right now. And we'll see. Maybe that changes depending on the landing spot, but I do think it's unlikely that we see Starks get more box snaps than Emmanwori right now. So even though Starks, he earned better marks as a run defender, Emmanwori earned slightly better marks in coverage and overall, while also doing a slightly better job at getting his hands on passes. But coming back to that bigger difference for me between Starks and Emmanwori, being that Emmanwori figures to play much closer to the line of scrimmage, that's huge, right? He spent 43% of his college snaps in the box. That's the highest rate of any top 200 safety prospect in this year's class. But this would also make him the only prospect since 2018 to be drafted in the first round who spent more than 40% of their defensive snaps in the box for their college career. So that's pretty exciting, if you ask me, for IDP, because two of the things that we want the most out of safety prospects, being ideally first round draft capital and potential to play around the line of scrimmage, are also two things that we just don't ever get until now with Emmanwori. So yeah, this, along with being like a 96th percentile prospect in the model, I think just puts him over the top for me as the top safety option in this class. But there is another defensive back, if we can even call him that. It seems, that, number one in this class can be classified as much more of, I guess, yeah, much more as like a hybrid player, or even more specifically, Lisan Al-Gaib, the prophet here, to blend IDP and offensive scoring into one position, maybe. I'm talking, of course, about Travis Muad'Dib Hunter. I'm sorry if you guys don't get that reference, but I highly recommend watching Dune if you haven't already. Anyways, Travis Hunter, I'd say probably the most intriguing, polarizing, and dynamic prospect we've maybe ever had for fantasy. And there's a number of ways that this can go for him as, his ultimate fantasy potential. And that's why actually the only really way that the only way that I can, kind of possibly work through the options here was to create kind of a flow chart of the possibilities. And since this is an IDP podcast, you're only listening to this if you're in an IDP league. I'm going to focus specifically on his value for IDP leagues. Nate and I actually had a larger Travis Hunter discussion in our wide receiver preview episode with more of a focus for offensive leagues. So you can go back and listen to that as well. And then more talk about him in our rookie mock draft episode with Kate Majuk and Nick Bodiford, which is out now as well. But let's look at Hunter for IDP leagues. And the first thing that is going to matter is his designation on whatever fantasy platform you're playing on. So there are three different possibilities there. The first being that he's designated only as a wide receiver. The second being that he's designated only as a cornerback. And third, he's given a dual designation, meaning you can start him as either a wide receiver or a cornerback. And for the sake of this exercise, let's assume that his designation is in line with which team drafts him and how they're most likely to utilize him. Let's assume that fantasy platforms take their cues from that, which we know is not always the case, but we need to simplify this somehow. So starting with him as a wide receiver only, the next step will be to know if your league is going to allow any points that he might accrue on defense to be added to his weekly scoring totals. If that's the case, then I'm fine with him being a top 5 pick in rookie drafts, because you're getting bonus points for who I think is the top wide receiver in this class, where he doesn't you're getting the bonus points on top of what he's going to play as a wide receiver. But where he doesn't automatically become 102 for me is with the risk of him not playing a full-time wide receiver role, right? Regardless of the designation, means that, he might be slightly limited in his opportunities on both sides of the ball, but getting points for both still keeps him in play as a top 5 pick for me. Now, if your league does not allow for defensive points to be scored by offensive players, and he's only designated as a wide receiver, then that risk of him not getting a full workload on offense becomes even greater, which lowers obviously his potential weekly ceiling. And if that's the case, then I'm personally probably not taking him higher than 109, I think is where I kind of worked it out to be, which I think even might be still too rich for some, but I think we can still have this hope or kind of bank on, his wide receiver situation to improve and become clearer in future years, which will get him back closer to that wide receiver 1 potential. it could go the other way as well, though, right? But that's kind of a risk that I think I'm personally going to be okay taking in this draft class, specifically in that mid to late first roundish range, for if he's designated as a wide receiver only and is only getting wide receiver points. So now, what if he's designated only as a cornerback on your fantasy platform, because the team that drafts him views him more in that role, and that influences the platform to designate him as such? So in that case, and if assuming your league allows him to score offensive points, then to me, he is no question the 102 in rookie drafts, because I think even if a team views him as a cornerback first, the whole reason that he's considered this elite prospect is because of his ability to play both sides of the ball. And as Lisan Al-Gaib, he's going to push to do just that, and he'll get the opportunity to do so, which means you're going to get receptions, you're going to get receiving yards, you're going to get receiving touchdowns for a cornerback on top of tackles, pass breakups, interceptions, etc., which no other cornerback is going to get, making him a massive cheat code, right? Even if he's only situationally used as a wide receiver, that's still a massive advantage at a super volatile position where you no longer have to worry about that volatility and now have a much higher ceiling at the position. So that's where he'd be locked into 102 for me. On the flip side of that coin, if he's designated as a cornerback and you're not getting offensive points in your league, then the absolute earliest that I'd consider him is mid-second round. I have I think 207 on the chart there. But it could be later. The only reason that he's even that high is because of a potential designation change at some point if a team starts to use him more as a wide receiver. But that wouldn't likely come until 2026 at the earliest. And in the meantime, you're potentially getting a non-full-time cornerback that could only be used as that. So I'm typically not drafting cornerbacks at all in rookie drafts. So I think even 207 might be too high based on that risk. But again, the pick would be made with the hope that change and getting him back in wide receiver one conversation beyond his rookie year. But I understand that's a risk that not everyone is willing to take. So could definitely be later than that as well. I think just 207 becomes the absolute earliest that I would take him if he's a cornerback and you're only getting cornerback points, at least for year one, right? And then lastly, if he's given a dual designation, meaning that you can slide him into wide receiver or cornerback in your starting lineup, then that could also be huge, right? Ideally, we want our leagues to allow scoring to count on both sides of the ball as well, because for the same reason that I mentioned earlier with leagues that allow that, he's a top 5 pick. And with this specifically, we could still use him as a cornerback. So even higher than that. And once again, the pick is 102 for me pretty easily, right? So if he has any kind of cornerback designation and your league allows for offensive points, then 102 is the play. If we don't get points for both offense and defense, but he is still somehow designated as a dual designation player, then unfortunately we can't really take advantage of that dual designation, which means that we're going to likely use him almost exclusively at whatever position he scores best in, which is likely wide receiver, right? Which, as we talked about before, as a wide receiver only, he does carry risk for sure. So probably back to that top 5 at best pick in rookie drafts, or not too far from that at least. But because we could, potentially plug him in at cornerback if he's not working out at wide receiver, and then still have that future hope at least of his role becoming clearer down the road, meaning ideally he becomes closer to a full-time wide receiver. And in that case, he can still be wide receiver 1 for this class, even if not as a rookie. So I don't want him to slide outside the top 5, the risk being that he just becomes more of a full-time cornerback, in which case 105 is way too rich. But I think that that's just going to depend on how risk adverse you are, right? Personally, we win our leagues by attacking high upside plays. So I'll take that swing at 105 as the earliest, but third round is probably going to be the latest as well, right? There's a massive range. This flow chart could have been a lot crazier. I could have been looking like Charlie Kelly in Always Sunny, and talking about Pepe Sylvia and all the different possibilities that could have gone here. But I wanted to try to keep it as simple as possible. We don't know the landing spot or anything like that yet, so This is kind of how I'm approaching Travis Hunter right now, depending on different leagues. Obviously, it matters what kind of league you're in and what your scoring is going to be in those leagues. So that's why stuff like this kind of matters, and context is important for how we should be valuing Travis Hunter, because your league format is going to play a massive part in that. So that's it for the Travis Hunter conversation and for all the rankings as well, and I guess the specific DBs. But we could do a quick recap of the rankings here, I guess. But yeah, man, who knew DBs could get so complicated? So just to recap rankings real quick, I've got Billy Bowman Jr. at number 10, Sebastian Castro out of Iowa at number 9, Lathan Ransom out of Ohio State at 8. Jonas Sanker out of Virginia is 7. Andrew Mukuba out of Texas is 6. Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State is 5. At number 4, I've got Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. Number 3 is Malaki Starks out of Georgia. Number 2 is Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina. And with an asterisk next to his name, Travis Hunter is number 1 out of Colorado. So we'll see how it shakes out, but that is it for today. I'm excited to see how the NFL draft shakes out for sure, and how much, if at all, these rankings change. And for Travis Hunter specifically, a lot of work went into this one, especially doing it solo. So if you guys would please be so kind to like and subscribe, that helps me a ton. I appreciate you all who have been doing that and tuning in here pre-draft, and hope you'll be back post-draft as well, since I'll be ranking them again, and I'll also have some shorter form combined offense plus IDP rankings videos on YouTube as well, coming out right after the draft. I've linked the safety prospect model in the episode description. And then later this week, be on the lookout for my top 100 offense plus IDP big board / rankings for both 1QB and Superflex leagues. That'll be out on PFF.com by the end of this week. So that's it. That's all. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, peace out.